I saw Steven Soderbergh's new film, Presence. It's one of his experimental, low-budget films, which are my favorite in his catalog. If you haven't seen Bubble, go watch Bubble. It's imperfect too. It's an art experiment, but I love it. So this is his first foray into, I guess, what you would call horror, but I don't think this is a horror film at all. Honestly, I think this is a family drama told from a very unique perspective. We get the family drama through the perspective of a ghost in this house that they've all just moved into. The entirety of the movie is first-person perspective through the eyes of the entity or the ghost or the presence, if you will. The downfall to that is that we get things in vignettes. It feels like video game cutscenes. And cinematically, I have a big problem with that. It doesn't really work as a film. As an art experiment, it does work though. And it is a really cool, unique way for the story to unfold. We even get dips to black between each vignette. So we know, one, that time has passed, and two, these are very separate situations that we put together like puzzle pieces. And the entire film feels like a puzzle that you're putting together as it progresses. You learn about each family member. You can relate to these characters because they are imperfect. They're not perfectly good. They're not terribly bad. They're somewhere in the middle, just like we are as people. So when things do happen in this film, you feel it yourself. You relate to that character. Acting is pretty strong throughout the film. And as I said, character development and story is pretty riveting. Let's talk about the actual filmmaking here. Steven Soderbergh is the camera operator with a director of photography supervising, because he's got the camera in front of him on a gimbal the whole time, moving throughout the house as the ghost. And it makes sense because he needs to direct that character, the ghost character. Probably the most fascinating part is how the ghost has an emotional connection to the people in the house without ever speaking a word. The way that you start to feel that as the movie progresses is my favorite thing about this movie. The ghost moves throughout the house, but it's a ghost. So why does it have to go through the house the same as a human, up and down stairs, through doors, all that stuff? This is his world to build and his rules to create, but it does stand out to me as something that is a limitation of the budget, maybe. The other thing is blocking. There are no reverse shots in the film. So if you have two characters talking, you can't shoot over one shoulder and then come and shoot over the other shoulder. That's not how this film can work, because the way the world is built is everything happens through the eyes of the ghost. So if that's going to happen, the ghost has to literally walk back and forth between those two characters for the shot reverse shot to happen. The vast majority of this film is a bunch of singles or one-er shots that go for a very long time. Soderbergh is very good at executing those, and he really hold nothing back this time. There are some very long one-ers that are fantastic. But because of that, the blocking has to be such a way that the camera can just sort of move back and forth. The most notable time for me is family dinner. The blocking is you have a mother and father on either end of the table, which is fine, and then you have the siblings on the same side of the table beside each other rather than sitting across from each other, which would make more sense and be more realistic. But then the ghost would have to constantly be circling the table to get those facial expressions when the dialogue is happening. So by putting the two kids beside each other on one side of the table, then the camera can just move left to right and get the facial expressions that it needs, or do a single wide, which is often what Soderbergh chooses to do, which is a little problematic for me because when there's more subtle facial expressions, you should be a little closer so that we can really engage with those emotions. But the limitations of the world building that he has done here don't allow for that most of the time. Another blocking time that really stood out to me is the entire family rushes out the door to stand on the deck outside of their house to talk. And when they do that, they're all facing the house the whole time. Or if they look away, when they say a line, their head turns back around to face the house because the ghost is watching through a window. So if they don't look back at that window, we as the audience won't get their facial movements along with the dialogue that they're trying to deliver. And it stands out as a little bit weird, awkward, and unrealistic. There is one situation where there's a convenience, there's a character needed that's very tropey for this type of film, and they just happen to have access to that character, and it's a little silly. I don't like it. I think they could have done completely without that character or part of the story, and we would have been fine. When we finally get to the third act, we've really become part of this family and relate to them. So when the third act happens and it gets heavy, it hits even harder than you would expect. Overall, Presence is a fantastic experience. I'm not necessarily calling it a film because it's not. It's an art piece, and it is a 4 out of 5. I loved this story. I can't wait to watch it again, because at the end you start rethinking everything that you saw, and you want to watch it again to see if there's breadcrumbs there, and you know that there are.